It's really fun to have someone on the show that is just really full of life, full of smiles, full of laughter, and yet really talking about how do we overcome the obstacles in our lives that will create happiness and freedom and all of those types of things. I'm really happy to have on the show today Tracee Dunblazier. She actually is an author of many books, also a publisher, and she has written a series of books about being a slayer. And I'm looking forward to that. And her definition of a slayer is a person who strives to overcome any obstacle with integrity, love, and compassion. So this is going to be a great interview. I hope you'll enjoy it, and I look forward to having you join us.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Tracee, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderfully today.
Hey, I am so excited to have you on the show. I really appreciate your coming on. You have written a number of books, and we're going to talk about some of those. What I'd love for you to share with the audience is how did you get to this point in your life? I'm sure there's an amazing story behind all of this.
Well, there's a lot of ways to tell it. The work that I do really began as a party game. I was born demonically challenged. I used to have nightmares and night terrors from earliest ages, I remember them from like 2 years old, and, paranormal visitations, that sort of thing. But it was something that internally I always had a sense of wisdom about it, even though it was terrifying. And over the years, I kept it to myself. I never shared that part of my world with other people. I learned a lot about multiple religions, did everything that I could to find a home to understand who I was. And then finally, I've been clairsentient, clairaudient, and clairvoyant. And a few of my friends had an idea about that. And then one of them, somebody I'd done a reading for, told, I was working in marketing at the time for Donna Karen, and she told my direct supervisor that I had done a reading for her, and he's like, "Oh my God, she needs to be a gift with purchase." So they started, we would do these big, huge fragrance events. And so when people would buy something, they could come have a reading with me. And one time when we were up in Portland, there was literally a line all the way down the aisle and all the way, I couldn't see the end of it, is how many people were interested in what I was doing. And that was the first time that I was like, there's something more to this. And people would sit down and they would end up in tears because we would connect on something that was deeply meaningful for them. And that was the first time I recognized that my life is not necessarily going to be in marketing, and that there's something to healing and to acknowledgement, just being willing to give a name to something for someone who hasn't been able to voice it themselves is so powerful. And the healing experience of that is so freeing. So that's where it started. And that was the point at which I started working nonstop. I worked almost 12 hours, 7 days a week for a year to really get into what being psychic was about. And then I kind of took a healing turn, and then I also doing my own personal spiritual work was a huge part of it, trying to remedy that rift between myself and my spirit life.
All right. And and clairvoyance, that's an interesting, that's a word that some people struggle with a little bit. And yet you have people that talk about being able to sense things and so forth. It's a gift. It's a gift. And I think some people have that gift, others don't. They may call it by different names, right, but it's still an amazing gift. So what brought you to writing these books?
Well, I thought I had a very, not necessarily a unique story. I feel like I had a story that probably hundreds of thousands of other people had a similar story, but nobody was talking about it. And basically that is, I have a lot of spiritual trauma. I used to have these nightmares, and it took me a long time of reflection and meditation and spiritual work to dredge up some of these spiritual imprints or past lives that I'd had that my spirit still carried, that I hadn't reconciled. I hadn't been able to grieve them. So it was through that process that I wanted to really connect with people who have that level of spiritual acknowledgement or consciousness, and to not label it as mental illness, because that's really the only other option, especially here in the Western world, is this: when somebody is clairvoyant or clairaudient, you can very easily be outcast in your family. People or people will shuttle you right into the psychologist because there's something wrong with you. And I turned away from the Western world to do this work so that I could give it another voice for people who had similar experiences.
All right, and you've written this series of books. Talk a little bit about the series that you've written.
So the Demon Slayer's Handbook series, which is this here, it has three different books. It has Master Your Inner World, which is the first volume, which is this. It comes with many stories, but it really is about your relationship to your inner world, the inner spiritual dimensions that you have, that you connect with. The next book is Heal Your Soul History, and that is very much dealing with your spiritual imprints or past life history, however you want to frame it. We all have inclinations from the way our soul is imprinted, ways that we perceive the outside world and other people and ourselves. And so it really addresses that. And then the most recent book, which just came out last August, there we go, is Conquer Your Karmic Relationships, Heal Spiritual Trauma to Open Your Heart and Restore Your Soul. And this actually kind of covers an expanded version of the two, plus a lot more. It really addresses our relationship to sometimes our relationship to authority, to sexuality and divinity, to food and money, how we resource ourselves in our lives, and just how all of those relationships are the building blocks of how we relate to ourselves and create the lives that we have.
So let's talk about mastering our inner world, because I think that that becomes one of the biggest challenges that people have been facing, specifically with the pandemic. As I've talked to different people, I've had people tell me that the pandemic almost destroyed them. Yes. Because they just had to sit at home. I've had other people say, you know what, I had to sit at home and I just made the decision. And so they've been writing, or they've been doing other things very productive, very significant. And I suspect that the difference between the two just really has to do with that inner soul, that inner person. And as you talk about, these imprints, these spiritual imprints, and just the various imprints that have been in our lives, I look at that, and as we talked a little bit before we started the show, I have many friends who have been in situations where they shared with me what they consider past life experiences, where they've gone back and tried to identify what are some of those imprints that are causing them to behave the way they do. I personally happen to look at it from more of a scientific standpoint, that, there's so much DNA that we inherit from our ancestors, and it is not uncommon to have habits, to have those type of things imprinted within our lives, coming from our DNA, affecting our souls and how we behave. So with that as the foundation, let's talk a little bit about how does someone, number one, become aware enough? Because I think this is the biggest challenge. How do you become aware enough to say, you know what I'm experiencing right now is not what I want? And I think a lot of people kind of sense that, but are not willing to verbalize it. Yes. But I'm not experiencing what I want. But how are they able to finally get to the point where they realize that, it's me. Mm-hmm. It's not the outside world. It's not this person. It's not that person. I can't blame anyone else. Right. It's me. Now, are circumstances affecting us adversely? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But how we react to those is what gives us a choice of either being happy
Yes.
productive, or being depressed, anxious, sad, non-productive, all those types of things.
Right.
So help the audience to understand, based on your experience, how do we get to the point where we're able to look inwardly and then start to identify some of those imprints, not worrying about where they came from. The reality is that they're there.
Right.
And so how do we do that?
So I want to say one thing regarding every person comes in with a framework. Yours is a scientific framework, and there is no better framework for you than that. It's not, you're not wrong, and it's not some other way and you just didn't get it. People become snobby about their perspective, and whatever framework we have is intended to help us see and evolve and enable our deepest soul revelations and gifts. Like, that is the framework on which we will build.
Yes.
And that's how it should be.
And that is well said, by the way. I think
This
that's really a good point.
And
I think the reason I brought that up is as the audience is listening, sometimes it's really interesting. If they hear one direction, they just turn off. They hear the other direction, they turn off. And what I'm trying to say to the audience is, hey, listen here, because there are other, as you say, we all have a different perspective, but the reality is, whatever someone's perspective is, we can fit that into our own perspective.
Absolutely. And so then, to answer your question, what we come across, for those who are listening today, this conversation has value for them specifically. This is going to give them some information about, we in the metaphysical world, we call it shadow work, right? It's those part of yourself, those imprints that are hidden to you that become illuminated as you develop in life. And I find the things that you resist the most are the things you should walk to the fastest.
Yes.
So what you are resisting is your unconscious self trying to tell your conscious self, hey, pay attention to this. This is valuable to you. Something about this is important to you. It's going to tell you something about you. So the more you resist something, the more you go, oh, I'd never do that. Oh, no, absolutely not. The more you do that, that's your first clue. Oh, go here.
Well, you know what? I love the quote, and I can't even tell you who said this, but that which we resist persists.
Yes.
And it's interesting when I see people trying to help others overcome something, and they keep focusing on it. And it's like, and they never overcome it. And it's like, because you're resisting it. You keep focusing and pushing so hard against it.
Right.
It just continues.
Yeah, you can't overcome something without walking through it fully, seeing what it is, seeing how you got it, seeing why it's valuable, and then saying, hey, while this is valuable, I could learn the same thing doing it this way over here. Right. So you take what you have and then you change it into something new. And so it's that willingness to walk towards what gives you the strongest reaction.
So as you talk about mastering the inner world, what we're really talking about is, how do we improve our lives? How do we raise the level of our lives up, in financially, socially, in our relationships, in our family? I think with the pandemic, last year, as a matter of fact, I was interviewing a fellow from Florida, and he had a good friend up in New York that was an attorney. And he said his attorney told him that he is just inundated with divorce.
Yes.
And it's like, because of the pandemic, because all of a sudden people are having to be home with each other. And guess what? They never had to do that. They could go to work. They could do all of this. And all of a sudden, you know what? And yet somewhere down deep, they did love each other at one time, and they still probably do. They just are not getting along. Right. How does this help people? How do you suggest to them that they're able to actually do that inner work so that they can truly improve those relationships that are so important to them?
I think practicing mindfulness, which is being aware of something but not reacting to it,
Mhm.
And I also think that we have to start recognizing that our judgment isn't against other people. It is something, it's telling us something about ourselves. When we judge other people for something they've said or done, or the way they look, that's us. That's more information for us about us. And we have to learn to have compassion for that. That's one thing that, nowhere in the world, maybe religion kind of, sort of, but then not really, can you learn actual compassion. We more and more, it's very interesting. I did this, some research on, I'm working on a new book on transformative grief, because I believe that grief is the one aspect that, if it's a skill that we have, it's an ancient skill that actually molds who we are, because it helps us to dig through our resistance to then actualizing and realizing and actualizing different aspects of ourselves. But we don't ever really get to learn to be patient, to learn to have compassion for the way we are now, to accept it and love it as it is, and then to decide to make a shift to it, to make a change of some sort. People, it's like resolutions on January 1st. You set all these goals, but by the 15th, you're like, oh, I want to eat that whole cake, or whatever it is. People get bored because you have set, you said, I need to climb this mountain in 30 days, and then you get irritated because you're not going to do it. So it's like having compassion for the person that you are, and setting goals that suit your condition.
Well, and what's interesting, as you talk about that, and you say, potentially you learn that in religion, not necessarily, maybe so in some respects, but I think you've hit on an important point. How can we ever show compassion for others unless we've learned to show compassion for ourselves?
Right.
And I suspect that as we look at compassion for others, it's doing something kind for them and some of those types of things. But that's not easy for us to do for ourselves.
Right.
In fact, I remember I had a neighbor when I was living in Boise, a wonderful, wonderful couple, older couple, and they were the kindest people. They would do things for people beyond belief. Mm-hmm. And they lived right across the street from, we were both on acre lots, and all they had was lawn. So one day I sent my boys over there and said, I want you to go mow their lawn for them. And afterwards they came to me and said, oh, please don't do that. We can do it ourselves. And I thought to myself, how easy is it to have compassion for others, but not allow others to show compassion and kindness to us?
Yes. I mean, I think that generationally speaking, I think that every new generation is imprinted with a new reference point with that. Like, the kids that are 30 and under today have this whole level of entitlement that previous generations don't really get, because they feel entitled to that compassion and then to that love and to those resources, they just deserve that. And of course they do, right? Of course that we all deserve that, but they were imprinted with this software in their brain that says, hey, yes, you can have that, and you can take all the time you need to get it, and it's powerful. And I think that's the joy of living in a multi-dimensional culture. Actually generational is really what I meant to say, but it is multi-dimensional as well. But living in a multi-generational culture, we have to learn to recognize that each generation was given a gift to bring to the planet. And we can all learn from that, and learn to respect it, and learn to awaken it in ourselves, which I think is the point.
Yes. So let's go back to, how does an individual, all right, I am struggling like crazy. Okay. How do I go in and actually start to correct and deal and have that type of compassion for myself and understanding and insight to where I can start to make those changes of the outcomes that I'm experiencing?
It's a practice. So it's something that you begin to do every day a little bit. Mindfulness. First of all, you used a word, correct. So in this philosophy, there's nothing wrong. There's just what works for you and what doesn't work for you, right? Because if we have been demeaned in some way or diminished by saying that we're wrong, we have to spend all this time getting over the shame of having been wrong.
Yes, yes.
There's all of these layers. So learning to breathe first and foremost. Learning to take deep breaths all the way to your gut and just give yourself time, 2 minutes to sit and breathe, and that's it. Then the next week, if you did that every day for 7 days, then the next week, while you're breathing, become aware of what you're thinking as well, right? So you just become mindful. You don't ignore it, you acknowledge it. If it makes you emotional, you allow that emotion to rise and to keep moving, right? The more you give yourself, the more you stop. You brought up at the beginning, the pandemic has just obliterated people's perspective of who they are, what life is, because it made them stop and address what they didn't like in themselves or what they didn't like in each other. And it didn't give them any distracting outlet. All of those were just taken away from us. So every individual has to learn to do that for themselves and just give themselves a little bit of time to themselves, as much as they can bear. Let's not pretend that it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. People have spent decades avoiding certain things or certain ideas about themselves or certain beliefs, right? People are going to wake up into new thought forms and new ideals that are the opposite of how they were nurtured growing up. They're going to find out that what they believed to be true is not true, right? And you have to give yourself the time and space to grieve that. So those are the 3 things: breathing, mindfulness, and then grieving.
Okay. And mindfulness is really, I did an interview the other day and I liked the comment that came up. Mindfulness, in my opinion, is really consciously being able to take control of the unconscious.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's amazing. So with this, conquer your karmic relationships. I want to talk about that a little bit, because you talk about how karma really plays directly into your relationships, your romantic relationships, as well as your relationships in every way. But let's talk about that a minute. And what do you mean by that? And what's been your experience with that?
So karma, people think of karma as punishment and reward. Karma, the word is a Sanskrit word, and it means a reaction to an action taken. So it really, conceptually, is really about the pattern that is created when an action is taken. There's a reverberation that happens that can be endless, right? Which lends to the idea of a pattern. So your karma are your past life or spiritual imprinted patterns that you've come into life with. And that those start you with a particular perspective, and then it allows you to, in recognition of them, decide whether or not they still serve you, whether or not you might want to upgrade or expand that pattern to do something different, give you a different response to it. So that's what karma is. And spiritually speaking, I have I came in with many patterns in relationship to food, my relationships to food and money, my relationships to men, my relationship to myself as a female, my sexuality, being committed to being with men, but probably bisexual in any other lifetime. So I had all of these things going on. And while I knew who I was and the choices that I was making, it really allowed me to see, to see anybody where they're at and be accepting of that. I don't really have anything that says, oh, it shouldn't be that way in me. And so I think that broad viewpoint with my own personal experiences in relationship to long suffering as an empath, I grieved every day of my life for my first 50 years. So it's been a nice 5 years off. But empathy and grief has been a very important part of my transformation into being free of some of these old patterns.
So when we talk about karma, because I know as I've been looking at some things, I look at consequences, and I think people don't understand that every action that we take, every act that we perform creates, as you say, it's kind of like the butterfly effect. The minute that wing starts flapping, it's going to affect somebody somewhere without them ever knowing it.
Right.
Is there a difference between what you're talking about, karma, and what I'm suggesting as far as consequences?
Not really. I think that when we talk about karma, I think that it really refers to a spirit, a person, a soul, taking an action and then understanding the impact that that action had on other people. That's what karma is. Karma isn't necessarily having that same bad thing happen to you. Your karma is being able, needing to or having to witness the impact and feel the impact that your action had on someone else.
Okay, so this whole concept of karma, because I think everyone misuses that word then, based on what you're saying, because, I do something bad and then something bad happens to me and people say, well, it's just karma. You expect it. And you're saying that's not really what karma is.
It's deeper than that. I mean, here's the thing. So when you do a bunch of bad things, when you feel remorse for those bad things, that's when other bad things happen to you. Because there are sociopaths out there who they continue to be criminals and nothing ever happens to them because they don't carry the energy of the need to experience their consequences. Now, if karma will tell you that in some other lifetime, they will come back maybe 10 lifetimes from now, and they will be at the brunt of every bit of consequences they created in the other lifetime. Right? So you just have to expand your viewpoint of it across time and space. It's not immediate gratification that something bad's going to happen.
Okay. Or in the next life, if you happen to believe in that, you're still going to have to deal with it because your soul's not going to change just because you've moved from one dimension to another dimension.
Exactly.
Interesting. So then how does that play directly into the romantic relationships?
In so many ways, I mean, I think that when human beings come together, if you get into a relationship with somebody that you've already given them a job, you've given them a job of being your caretaker, your educator, your lover, your only source of affection and love. Like if you've gotten together in a relationship where the person has a job, that's a pattern, that's a dynamic that you are participating in. So whether or not you can manage that relationship, say for a year or two, and then you get into another one and then another one and then another one, you're still participating and creating relationships that have a job, something that they can do for you that if it weren't for that, you wouldn't come together. Right. So I think that it manages and specifies your partners in your perspective. You choose people they become visual to you because of the patterns that you hold about relationships and their purpose.
And are you able to change that if you haven't had the relationships you want in the past?
Absolutely. So let's take a lot of people choose relationships for money, for the resources, to be taken care of, to feel safe, right? So if I'm choosing those relationships, then the first thing I need to reconcile within myself is finding a way for me to live a life that I feel safe in. I create my safety. I create the resources that make me feel safe, and recognize that my sense of safety is really about a larger question, which is there anything really out there beyond?
Well,
me and my higher self.
You can't rely on someone else to
Uh-uh.
provide that safety for you. As you say, you've got to create that
Right.
for yourself. Okay.
So that's how it starts. If you have relationships, if you choose abusive relationships, in what ways are you not meeting your own needs, and how are you maybe being disrespectful to yourself or not showing compassion to yourself? Right. So we choose people who treat us how oftentimes we treat ourselves in ways that we aren't fully aware or that we may not recognize as abuse. Right.
You're going to get some comments on that one. Especially when if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying basically is, sometimes we are experiencing what we actually allow ourselves to experience, and we can't blame them. We have to really take responsibility for ourselves.
Well, ultimately, look, I'm a rape survivor. I don't even call it a survivor, but I have been raped, and I have overcome the trauma of having been raped. There is a difference between being a victim of a crime, and if somebody is in an abusive relationship, it is not his or her fault. The abused, it's not their fault that this person is abusing them. The idea that they can be accountable for themselves is not to blame them for being in the abusive relationship. It is to help them find a position of power in that relationship and to move away from it.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. So rather than being the victim, you are literally in control and can take control of the situation. And that's not easy.
No,
that's not easy.
People spend lifetimes doing that. It's not, I worked with a lot of abused women, a few abused men, but the demographic of abused men is so much higher than anybody possibly knows. But the truth is, at the end of the day, the only way out of that is to find a way out of that. Like, empower yourself to find the way out, whether or not that's running, whether or not that's getting on the underground railroad that takes you out of your state and makes you incognito and away from the person who's abusing you, if it's on that level, or standing up to them and moving on. Wherever you're at, you are the only person who is going to be the final say.
And as you've helped some of these people, is there a common ground upon which you work with them that really helps them?
Yes, I think that. So for when I work with people, I'm a straight shooter, and when people are, if a person is in a position to want to remain victimized, and that's a thing, and it's not, if that's where somebody's at, that's where they're at. It is that process that helps to illumine them to the power that they have over time. But if that's where they're at, working with somebody like me is not helpful, because all they will do is feel not enough to get themselves over the hump. They will constantly feel victimized by somebody's direct, like, well, what are you going to do about it? Right. And that's a truth. So there is a framework of learning and then graduating out of each level of self-awareness or self-ignorance. Right. When we are fully victimized, we don't know the power in us yet. We haven't practiced it. We haven't set boundaries. We haven't acknowledged boundaries that we even set for ourselves. We give other people the power to set our boundaries for us. Right. And that's a pretty big wall to overcome. And so that's the first step.
Well, and you talk about radical acceptance and of self and what that does for them. Share with the audience a little bit about what you mean by radical acceptance, how we can radically accept ourselves.
Accept things exactly as they are today, exactly with what is going on today. Accept it, love it, acknowledge it, embrace it. When you can give yourself that kind of compassion, for example, over my lifetime, I have gone up and down in weight, and not even really valuable to people around me, but really valuable to me. I have struggled with being too thin, meaning my mind won't allow me to be at my normal weight because it feels too thin. And then I had this whole other relationship with food. And I realized that my relation, especially during the pandemic, I've had so much fun.
I'll bet.
But food, I was writing about this today. You know, food has been my joy, the way I express love, the way I express my creativity, the way I feel safe. You know, if I have packed cabinets, I feel safe. If I'm good for 4 to 6 months, I feel okay. I figure in that time I can reassess and fill up the coffers if I need to. It's this thinking that's not rational for the life that I have today. And this is a new level of it, right? I'm past my body consciousness, and now I'm into the pattern of why I am the way I am. So for me, accepting that I have given food the responsibility of expressing all of those different aspects of myself, it allows me to say, you know what, I think I'm going to take this responsibility back and this responsibility back and this responsibility back from food. And maybe I'm going to give food. I watched a television show the other day, and 2 men were out camping, and they went out with nothing except for, a knife and enough to make a fire. And they caught and killed a snake and ate it. And for the first time, it awakened this imprint in me that was like, they just had a meal, and that's going to last them for maybe a day or 2 or maybe 3, and that's fine. And I was like, oh my God, I don't need to eat that much ever. Like in our culture tells us, 5 meals a day or 3 meals a day, or I've done every bit of that. And for the first time, I reawakened that caveman part of me that said, hey, you really only need to eat when you are truly hungry. And that is enough for your body to sustain and be healthy. And so now I'm like I said, I'm taking back the responsibility of all that I have put on my relationship to food, and leaving it just to keep me healthy. And so that's what I mean by that. Our patterns, our karma, the way we accept who we are, where we're at. I'm an expert in this, and I still have this problem.
Oh, that's the case with all of us, isn't it?
It is. But it's interesting, because I think that a lot of people don't want to give that over, that they want to put people on a pedestal and say, well, you're really good at this, so you can't. And I don't want to know what you're not good at, or I don't want to know. You can tell me about how you used to have a problem, but if you can't handle your own problem, then you're certainly not going to help me handle my problem, right? We do that whole thing. So our culture is set up to not really allow for people to be who they are, and to receive what we can from them, and not expect more.
And just accept it. So what are some of the behavioral patterns that people continually repeat that really are keeping them from achieving and obtaining what they want to achieve in life?
Selfishness / caution and fear. When we are ultra selfish, we are trying to get for us. We also are not open to truly receiving and truly giving We can't always be in it's not always a one-way street. In order to fully receive, you have to give up some of what you have in order to create space to receive more. And so we sabotage that by doing what we need to for ourselves, and that's it. Like we stop right there. We put a roadblock on that street, and we don't allow the two-way traffic coming in and out. We don't allow that. So that's one of the ways I think that people naturally, unconsciously sabotage. Another interesting thing, and this goes back to breathing. When we are nervous or anxious or scared, we naturally hold our breath, which again, it's the physical body shutting down and closing off that conduit where we allow new energy in and old energy out, right? And so it's just another dynamic of the way we withhold. We withhold from the outer world, and even we withhold from ourselves. That to me is the biggest, to answer your question.
Is just not withholding. Okay, so selfishness and withholding. I was talking about breathing, and it's like, okay, wait a minute here. But you know what? That's true too. The breathing, as you say. But so selfishness, withholding, and how do you overcome that?
Breathing.
Breathing.
Breathing. I think the other side of it is some people like to try to control situations by being overgivers. So whatever it is that you're doing that's out of balance for you, if you feel more comfortable just giving and not receiving, or if you feel comfortable just receiving and not giving, whatever it is your thing is, challenge the other side. Challenge, that's gizmo right there. Challenge what you fear the most. Challenge what you resist the most. Because if you will allow yourself the opportunity to do that, you're going to not only learn something deeper about your hidden self, but you're also going to free yourself from the opinions of other people. Oftentimes when we hide elements of ourselves from ourselves, we also see that mirrored outside of us by people who judge us or people who withhold from us, right? We just, there cannot be a happy medium or harmony in those kinds of relationships when you are doing that to yourself.
Well, and I love this whole thing about being a slayer. And I'm looking at the definition that you have on your website, and I just love it. Is it okay if I read it to the audience? Okay. So what does it mean to be a slayer? A slayer is a person who strives to overcome any obstacle with integrity, love, and compassion. One who's willing to recognize the multidimensions that we all share through self-acceptance, personal development, and self-healing. Every day we're given opportunities to choose who we want to be. The only thing that matters is what you do next. Are you ready to be a slayer? I love it. I think that is fantastic. And that's kind of what your books are all about, isn't it? It
is. People, we have to learn to be independent and autonomous before we can truly unify with other people. And so again, when, if I don't have a job for somebody to have in my life, if I have done that for myself, then I can fully be in that relationship in every way, because it eliminates the expectations that I need to have on it. Right. And it leaves the other person also to be free to be who they are and contribute what they have.
And yet, when that expectation becomes a non-expectation, and yet that other individual is still willing to do that out of kindness and love rather than expectation, it changes the whole dimension of the experience, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It does. I think I think of myself in my 20s for this. I had all these, sometimes when I look back and I'm like, where did you get those expectations? Like, where did that even come from? But when we are fearful of being disrespected or not being honored or not being seen, right? If we're fearful of those things, then we set our expectations for other people to do certain things that make us believe that that's what they're doing, that they're respecting us or seeing us. And that doesn't guarantee that. It's only when you allow someone the freedom to be who they are and accept them as that then they are free to then love and respect you, because it comes from a joyful place, as you said, not a place of expectation.
Yeah,
and
it is a big difference. Big difference.
Big difference.
Well, Tracee, this has been amazing. We could go on forever, but guess what? Our time's coming to a close. How do people find your books?
Anywhere books are sold. You can get them all on Amazon. You can get them at beaslayer.com, Barnes and Noble. You can get right now the ebooks are all available on Kindle, and not national just yet. I mean, they have been, and that's a whole story. I need to go there. Anywhere books are sold, and my website is TraceeDunblazier.com.
Okay, so what would be your final message to the audience? If you had one message that you could share with the audience based on your life experiences with yourself and with others that you have helped.
I want to read this quote that I came across from it's from the chapter of Unity in Conquer Your Karmic Relationships. Unity is the coming together of all the parts of ourselves, loved, misunderstood, and unknown. And I think that we're all seeking unity. When we can have that compassion and that unity within ourselves, we can find a way to be right with other people.
Yes. And when we find it within ourselves, you're right, then not only can we be right with other people, but we can start to touch the lives of other people in a very positive way. Tracee, thanks so much for being on the show. This has been wonderful.
It has been. Thank you so much.
And folks, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to having you join us again soon again.